So, in the book of Ezekiel, after 24 chapters hammering on Jerusalem's coming judgment, the camera suddenly pulls way back. The focus shifts to all the surrounding nations. But this isn't just some long list of who's in trouble. Nope, this is actually a deep dive into how biblical prophecy works and what it tells us about the unchanging character of God. Okay, let's get into it.
Here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, we've got to lay down the rules of the road for how prophecy actually works. Then, we'll dig into three big case studies: Judah's gloating neighbors, the commercial juggernaut that was Tyre, and the famously unreliable ally, Egypt. And then we'll wrap it all up by asking, okay, so what? Why do these ancient words still matter to us right now?
Before we go any further, we have to know what kind of literature we're even reading. This isn't apocalyptic like the Book of Revelation, where events are laid out as stone-cold certainties. What Ezekiel is giving us is prophecy. And prophecy is different. It's interactive. It's designed to engage with our free will. It's a message from God that's meant to get people to change their ways.
So let's look at those rules, which, believe it or not, the Bible lays out for us pretty clearly. And this is really the key thing to get. Biblical prophecy isn't fatalistic. It often works on a conditional if-then basis. God knowing what's going to happen never cancels out our ability to choose. The prophet Jeremiah, way back in chapter 18, just spells it out for us. It's awesome. You can see it right here. God says that if he announces judgment on a nation and that nation turns from its evil, he'll relent. He'll change his mind about the disaster. Just think about Jonah and Nineveh. But it works both ways. If he promises to bless a nation and that nation turns around and does evil, he'll change his mind about the good he was going to do. The big takeaway here is that both judgment and blessing depend on how a nation responds. Okay, so with those rules in our back pocket, let's jump into Ezekiel chapter 25. This is where God turns his attention to the nations right on Judah's borders, and boy, they all made the same big mistake.
Just look at this breakdown. You've got Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia. So what was their huge sin? They gloated. That's it. When they saw God's temple destroyed and his people dragged into exile, they cheered, they mocked, they tried to get revenge. They basically kicked their brother when he was already down. And for that, God makes it clear, judgment is coming for them too.
All right, next up, a case study that gets a whopping 3 whole chapters in Ezekiel. We're talking about Tyre. It was the capital of Phoenicia, a global trade superpower, and its incredible wealth and blinding pride would become its total undoing. And here it is, Tyre's specific sin, laid completely bare in Ezekiel 26, verse 2. They looked at Jerusalem's destruction and didn't see a tragedy, they saw a business opportunity. With Jerusalem gone, Tyre figured it would become the one and only gateway of the peoples, and that its own pockets would get fatter. Their celebration was all about greed.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, especially when you look at how this prophecy played out. God said he would bring many nations against you as the sea brings up its waves. And what does history show us? 2 major waves. First, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians spent 13 years destroying the mainland city. Then, centuries later, Alexander the Great comes along and does something incredible. He takes the rubble from that old city, builds a land bridge out to Tyre's island fortress, and conquers it. It's just an absolutely stunning fulfillment of the prophecy.
But believe it or not, the prophecy gets even wilder. In chapter 28, Ezekiel starts talking about the king of Tyre, and the language he uses is, well, it's just off the charts. I mean, listen to this. He's called the model of perfection, blameless, he was placed in Eden, the garden of God, and even called an anointed cherub. This sounds like it's talking about someone or something way beyond just a human king.
Which, of course, brings us to the massive question that people have been debating for centuries. So what's going on here? Who is Ezekiel really talking about? Is this just a human king drowning in his own ego, or is he talking about Satan himself?
Well, while the debate is still going, the text gives us a really compelling way to look at it. The king of Tyre is being compared not directly to Satan, but to a fallen Adam. Think about it, a perfect creation placed in a kind of paradise, his magnificent city, whose own heart became filled with pride because of his beauty and his wealth. That pride and violence led to him being thrown out. It's this powerful, powerful metaphor for the fall of any person who starts to think they can be a god.
All right, for our final case study, let's talk about Egypt. For years and years, Judah kept looking to Egypt as their potential savior, first from Assyria, then from Babylon, but Ezekiel's message was crystal clear. Leaning on Egypt for help is like leaning on a broken stick. It's just going to snap and stab you in the hand. And the imagery here is just brilliant. In Ezekiel 32, verse 2, Pharaoh is painted as this giant crocodile, this monster thrashing around in the Nile, stirring everything up and muddying the waters. He's making a huge commotion, right? But it's all just a chaotic, self-serving show of force that has no real power to actually save anybody. It's the perfect picture of an ally who looks impressive, but is ultimately useless.
And here's where we see God's incredible sense of justice play out. Remember that super long 13-year siege of Tyre by Nebuchadnezzar? Well, it turns out he got almost no treasure for his trouble. So in Ezekiel 29, God basically says, Nebuchadnezzar, you did all that work for me besieging Tyre and got nothing for it. Don't worry, I've got your payment. Here's Egypt. The treasures of Egypt became the wages for Babylon's army. Amazing.
Okay, so after all that, Tyre, Egypt, all these gloating neighbors, what's the big picture? Why did God spend so much time revealing all this to Ezekiel and the exiles sitting in Babylon? Well, the message goes way beyond just, you're going to be judged.
It really boils down to three key things. First, for the Jewish exiles, this was a massive dose of hope. The same God who judges their enemies is the God who promised to bring them back home. Second, for all the other nations, it was a crystal clear warning. God is in charge, and you do not get to gloat over or harm his people. And finally, for us, right here and now, it's a timeless lesson in humility and a command for how we must treat anyone we might consider an enemy.
And you know, this idea isn't something that gets left behind in the Old Testament. It runs right through the entire Bible. Proverbs 24 straight up says, do not rejoice when your enemy falls. And then centuries later, Jesus takes it to a whole new level in Matthew 5, telling us not just to tolerate our enemies, but to actually love them and pray for them. The sin of Ammon, Moab, and Tyre is the very thing we're all commanded to avoid.
When you step back, what these chapters really show us is a God who is completely in control, weaving his own purpose through the prideful rise and the messy fall of human empires. So it leaves us with this one big question to chew on. If we really take to heart that God is sovereign over all of history, how could that, or maybe how should that, change the way we look at the chaos and the headlines in our own world today?